Hello friends, welcome to another theoretical discussion on non-ferrous metallography and characterization. Even though this is supposed to be a practical course or a laboratory course, given the times we are in, we are forced to have or confine ourselves to some theoretical talks or discussion. However, we will try to introduce some practical aspect to it, but as of now, in the initial stages, let's confine ourselves to such lectures. Now, in this lecture or in this talk, we will be focusing on one material that has been with us for a very long time now. Now, there was a period wherein we used this metal extensively or rather exclusively, and we named that era after this material. And we are going to talk about one such material or one such famous material that has been with us for a very long time. Now, the prehistoric times, the way we would classify it, or the beginning of this prehistoric times, we refer to them as Stone Age or Lithic Age. We have Paleolithic Age, we have Neolithic Age. The Paleolithic Age is the old Stone Age, Neolithic Age is the new Stone Age, and in between them we have Mesolithic Age. So in this age, whatever we call to be made of, supposing we say something is made, then those were made of stones, or rather clay. So in this age or in this prehistoric time, when we say something is made, something that is not readily available in the nature, but when we say there is that something is made in this area, it was made of stone or rather clay. And these are few examples here. So we have in this era we did make some figurines for worshipping, and we had some cave paintings from these era, and these things were largely made of clay or stones. Now, in addition to these figurines and paintings, we also used these stones and clays to make potteries and also jewels. So in this era, or the initial stages, or the beginning of the prehistoric time, we refer to them as Stone Age, and whatever we say or everything that was made of stones and clays. Now, the era after that, we refer to it as the Chalcolithic Age. So once we moved from this era of everything we made of stones and clay, and we moved from this era to an era called as Chalcolithic Age, and this age is nothing but, or we refer to as now as the Copper Age. In this discussion or in this lecture, we will be largely focusing on copper and its alloys. Now, when we talk about copper, the shift from the Lithic Age or the Stone Age to something that we are used to now, to an age where everything we make is predominantly of metal. Supposing you see a metal bar. Now, when someone asks you what this metal bar is made up of, and you don't have any clue of it, your go-to answer would be maybe steel. And since we are in steel age, that answer might be most of the time right. But there was a period immediately after the Stone Age, wherein whatever thing that was made up of metal was made of copper. And in this lecture, we will be talking about copper and its alloys. So as you can see, like in the Stone Age, wherein we had figurines made up of stones and clays, potteries and decorative items made up of clay and stones, we have a similar shift. We didn't change the materials that we make or the items that we make. We made the same items, but now using copper. So this marks the beginning of a new era. We started using metal, and we referred to that age as Copper Age. Now, before going into the technical details that we are always interested in this course, just to make it this course interesting, let we see how we arrived at this place where we started using copper. Let us just see how we discovered copper. Now, if you could recollect, when we talked about the Lithic Age or the Stone Age, we saw that in addition to things that were necessary for us, we used the things that we built things that we adored. We built things that we wanted to worship. Now, usually a picture is painted that when you talk about Stone Age man, the Stone Age man is really primitive, and he doesn't have a language, he doesn't know what he is doing, and that is the picture that we usually are portrayed. So that is the picture that is often given to us by some medium. But actually, if you look into the things that he used, the primitive man or the Stone Age man, if you look into the things that he used like we saw in the earlier slides, he used to build figurines, meaning he had the notion of worship, and he had the notion of artistic building of things. And also you had cave paintings, and that also shows that he was not only someone who was thinking about how to make or how to get by in life, but he also tried to have some fun in his life and tried to express his emotions, and that's the reason why we have those figurines and paintings. In addition to that, he also someone who adored himself, like when I say he or man, I mean like I usually say that it is a gender neutral term. I also say include. It implicitly includes women here. So the people of this time, they also made jewelries and potteries in this period, that is in the Stone Age, using clays and stone. In order to ensure that they had some color or texture in this beads or in this ornaments and the potteries that they built and that they used, they included certain materials which they found in the sand, and which they did not know what it actually was, but just since these materials had a different color and different texture, they included them for that purpose, just to add some color to the pottery they are building or the jewelry they are building. So just to make this jewelries fanciful and to have this pottery is more attractive, just to give them a good color, they included certain materials that they didn't know much of. And now when they built or when they designed and when they devised these jewelries and potteries, in order to make them hard, what they did was they put that in the kiln. They built it, they made the clay, they built the potteries with the clay, they built the jewelries with the clay, and not to make them hard, they put it in they placed it in a kiln. Kiln is nothing but some sort of a furnace wherein you just heat it and you raise the temperature and the clay becomes hard. So they put it in a kiln. And one day or once when they were working in this pottery or building jewelries, they realized that when they increase the things that they add or when they increase the material that gave them color, particularly that gave them a reddish color, when they increased this material, or that gave them a blue color, when they increased that material and put that on and placed that pottery in a kiln, they realized that the property of that pottery was different from the others. Supposing you have a pottery that comprises of just 20% of this material that gave them this color, and they had another pottery that comprises of largely say 80% of this material that gave them color, and when they placed both this material in the kiln, they realized that the one that had this 80% of the color adding material had a different property or a unique property when compared to the one that was largely made up of stones and clay. And that is how they were able to discover copper. The material that gave them the color was nothing but copper ore, and when they increased the amount of copper ore, the material that gave them color, in the pottery and in the jewelry, they realized that the property is different, and that is how they came about using copper, and that is where the Copper Age began. Now the discovery of copper, or the way that they began to use copper or produce copper, changed the whole way or their perspective of looking at a kiln. Like initially this kiln was used just to heat their potteries, just to heat their jewelries, just to make their clays hard. But once they have discovered that there is a new material that is present in this color adding substance, and they were able to extract this material from this color adding substance, they were able to separate this material from this color adding substance, and they were able to arrive at a new material that was totally different from that of the clay and stone. Then they started extracting or producing this new material or copper from its ore, and that is the origin of extractive metallurgy as we see it today. So what happened was, we began with the Stone Age, and in the Stone Age they started using some material that they didn't know much of for the purpose of attraction, for the purpose of its color. And when they used this material in the pottery, and they when they were processing this pottery, they realized that this material had a different property when they compared it with the stones and clay. And they realized that this material could be separated from the stone and clay and can be used on its own. And this perspective or this discovery of the material changed their way of looking into the processing technique. So we moved from kiln to crucible, and ultimately we began our journey with extractive metallurgy. And this is how the copper was introduced, and this is how the copper was this is how we arrived at copper, and this began a new age, or this began a new epoch in time, which we refer to as Copper Age or the Chalcolithic Age. Now, having some background of how we came about this copper, I mean, this side of the lecture, or this aspect of the lecture is just to make you, just to ensure that we are having a theoretical section that is interesting to us. It should not be rather just what are the different alloys in the copper that we are using today. I do not want to confine ourselves to that, but I just wanted to give you a brief an historical perspective of copper, and that is the reason why I wanted to spend, or I'm rather spending some time in this in these aspects of our discussion on copper. I hope you find it interesting. So what we now have is, we have seen that how we have discovered copper, or how we have arrived at extracting copper from the minerals that we had around us, or how did we accidentally come about the copper extraction. Now, immediately after the copper extraction, or immediately after knowing that discovery or copper has been discovered, it is important that we name this material, or we want to know how we came about with this name copper. So let us just look into the etymology of copper, like how did we came about this name. Now, like if you look into the symbol of the copper that is used, it is Cu, and if you just wanted to know why it is used as Cu, then we can easily relate it to its Latin name cuprum, and from that we get our symbol Cu. However, this was not the first name that was given to copper, or this was not the name that was established in the known world. For when you designate this material, we did not designate it as cuprum. For the first time when this material was designated, we did not designate it as cuprum. We designated it as Kyprios in Greek. So the first name that was given to copper was Kyprios. At least the first known name that was given to us was Kyprios, and it was given in Greek. This the reason we shift from Latin to Greek is because this was given at around 1st century AD. At that time, the technical language, even though the most of the known world was at that time was ruled by Rome, the Latin was not established as a lingua franca yet. But the people who were largely working on literature, or from that the people who were working on technical aspects, or the one who started noting things down, they did it around this time. This was a time when there was a shift between Greek to Latin, and around this time people were largely using Greek as a language to write down things, or the language to note things, and that is the reason why the initial name that was given to copper was Kyprios. And this name nothing meant nothing else, but it meant the region where a large amount of copper came from. So large amount of copper came to Rome from a particular place, and since it came from that place, the name was derived, like the name had to relate this place, and this is where the copper largely came from to the Roman Empire, and it came from Cyprus. So Cyprus is an island that is in the middle, or that is in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and in the 1st century AD, so large amount of copper to the Roman Empire came from this island Cyprus, and so in order to denote that this came from Cyprus, they called this material as Kyprios. Now today's, if you want to know where today's Cyprus is, here's a small map, and so as you can see, it is in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, and it is surrounded by countries like Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, of course. So the name cuprum, even though now we refer to it technically, or when you think about its symbol comes from, or we refer to it in its Latin form, originally it was referred to as Kyprios, and the reason for it is because it largely came from Cyprus at the time it was described, or at the time it was named. Now, having related to the name, or having both seen how this material was discovered and having seen how we came about using this name copper, now let us think about how long have we been using it. Let's see how long, or since we already know that we have an epoch named after it, let's just see how long have we been using it. So the first knowledge that we have from our archaeologists, like the oldest pieces of copper that were put to practice was around 9000 BC. That is 9000 years before this common era. So that is the first or the evidence that we have. Now the archaeologists have found this the first evidence that we have for the use of coppers, and this use of copper in this era was largely combined with the clays or stones. They were largely found in the ornaments, wherein there were large amount of clay embedded to it or large amount of stone materials embedded to it. So that means this copper in this era was, or this time period was largely like the ones that we saw in the Stone Age, and they were added just to have some, just to give some color to the ornaments or to color to the potteries that they were using. So even though there was we have the usage of copper in the 9000 BCs, but the usage was not explicitly for its property, but just the minerals that had copper had this unique color, and they used it for that purposes, and they used it along with clay for the ornaments and for the potteries. Now the shift happened around 7000 BC, and this shift, what was the shift is, like, instead of being used as an additive, instead of being used as an ore or a material that would give you a good color to your original utensil, in Iraq in the 7000 BCs, the copper was used for its own property. So the copper was cold work, meaning they did not now heat the copper, and they did not soften it, and they did not understand much of that, but they knew that when you beat copper it will not break like that of clay. So they cold worked it, and and after cold working they made it into structures that were that they need, and they started using. So example of these like pins, and example of so these are the examples that we can find around this era in Iraq. Like you would have pins and some sort of a tool that are made up of copper, and this was made purely by cold working. By this time we did not have much of an idea of how a material would behave when we raise the temperature. And one other thing is that in the eras before it, like if you talk about the sources of metal in the prehistoric time, the sources of metal were largely two. So one is the metals that were available were largely two. One is we had iron with us even in the prehistoric time. The other is copper. Now the source of iron was meteors that fell on our earth. They had large amount of iron in them. So these were referred to as meteoric ions. And the copper was the large, a source of copper in these eras were something called as native copper. The copper in its unreacted form was available to us in certain regions directly. Like we could find unreacted copper just by digging a few feet down the earth. So that was the source of two metals. Like iron, we have meteoric iron, and the copper we had the copper that was accessible to us was native copper, and this was largely pure and unreacted copper. So this copper we used for this copper was used in this prehistoric times. And like I said, in addition to separating the copper from its ore, we also had the prehistoric copper, and we used that for cold working. In addition to that, people started to extract the copper from its minerals that gave them the color. So they realized that by using the same Clint setup, we would be able to get the copper, that is native copper, from these ores, and they started extracting this copper in this era in Iraq. There is evidence for it and given by the archaeologist. And in the years 3000 BC, it became fairly clear that in these years, in the North America at least, people were people knew the hard working technique of copper. They built sharp tools. They were able to make shapes that were desirous to them, and these shapes were not made by cold working alone, but they knew that what are the effects of heat on the copper, and how malleable it is, and how ductile it is when you heat. And these understanding we arrived at this understanding around 3000 BC, and the evidence for this understanding is that we have very sharp tools that are made up of copper. We have spears, and we have spearheads that are made up of copper, and which the evidence still these evidence are still with us, and we were able to extrapolate from this evidence that during this period we have a good understanding of not only extracting and cold working of copper, but also how copper would respond to heat and how we can use that in a beneficial manner. Now these are the evidence, like these are how we progressed in using copper as the time evolved. So with time we we got to know more about this material, we got to extract it more profitably, and not only that, we started working on them, we started cold working on them, and we started hard working on them. Now, I will not be doing justice if when I talk about copper being used in certain civilization, and I will not be doing justice if I miss this civilization which is critical to us. So let us have a brief look before getting into the technical aspect of things. Let us have a brief look on how did we as Indians used copper. So what role did copper play? Like very briefly, let's see what role did copper play in our ancient India. So when I say ancient India, I mean this. So ancient India with its Indus Valley civilization, and the two civilizations that we are that we know of, that we are acquainted with, is the Mohenjo-daro civilization and the Harappa civilization. So in this civilization, there are evidences that we have been using copper since 3000 BC. So one of the way that we came across this copper was that we had a good trade relationship between Iran and Iraq and Turkey, and through this trade relation, it is said that we exchanged ideas, and these ideas involved metallurgical ideas, and we began using copper from this era. In addition to this great civilization, that is Mohenjo-daro and Harappa civilization, it is also, there is a small group of people who lived along these civilization. They were referred to as null culture, and even these people there are evidences that around 3000 BC, or even a little bit before that, they were using copper utensils. Not only just copper utensils that were crude in nature, but they had copper utensils both in the ornamental forms, that the copper made up, the ornaments purely made of copper are largely made of copper, and they had good weapons that showed the signs of hard working. So we gained a very good amount of knowledge about not only extracting but also processing the coppers, and these are the evidences are still with us. And particularly in this null culture, they had this system of burying the valuable things with the person who used them. So in their cemetery, we could find a good processed or a decently processed copper utensils, both vessels and ornaments. Now, in addition to our using copper, we produced. It is understood that from the we can gain it from the archaeologists that we formed or we produced several different alloys of copper, like in much more greater than what the original users gave us, like what we got from Iran or Iraq, as the theory goes. It is claimed that we discovered or we produced a huge number of alloys. Before you wave it off, before you wave that off, saying that it is possible that we did not know how to measure impurities or anything, and this is just the reason why we are able to see several copper alloys in this region. Before you just wave this fact off like that, it is important to note that when you consider number of smeltings in the different areas of the civilization, the ancient India had a very large number of smelting sites. When you compare the smelting sites with other places, India had relatively, for a given area, like for some 100 square miles, India had a very large amount of smelting area, smelting sites, and that would mean that we were so keen on processing copper, and whatever different copper alloys we have is not accidental, or it's not like we are careless and we didn't know how to measure the impurities, but rather we purposefully made them for making use of them. We purposefully made them for their advantages or their properties. So in India, before or around 3000 BC, we started using this copper. Maybe it is possible that in the days to come we would find that we have had even we have been using it even more before them, or it might be the case. But as of now, the data that we have suggests that we started using copper around this era, and not only that, we gained a more knowledge, or we ourselves developed a huge amount of knowledge on using coppers and developing new alloys. So this at least should motivate you guys for this, at least motivate you to look deeper into copper and its alloy. So I believe we have had sufficient amount of historical perspective of copper and its alloy. So let's get into the technical aspects. So when I talk about copper and its alloy, so we need to have, or the copper and its alloys are neatly being divided into separate sections. So we have our purest form of copper, which is referred to as coppers. So the purest form of copper is referred to as copper. So one thing can be done based on the observation of copper and its alloy is we can neatly categorize them, and the first category of alloys that comes from copper, or the first category of materials that come from copper, is coppers, and it is close to pure copper, and we refer to them as coppers. Now the coppers, they are produced for their electrical and thermal conductivity. The reason one would need to produce coppers is because they have a very good electrical and thermal conductivity. So the coppers are the material or the alloys which contain 99.3% or more of copper in them. So this alloy is characterized by this much amount of copper, and the need for producing them is because of their conductivity. Now the impurities that are present in these coppers include phosphorus, tin and arsenic. Now all these impurities, they affect or they negatively influence the electrical and thermal conductivity, and people are working, and when you want to produce these coppers, you would try to minimize these impurities. The only impurity that will not affect your conductivity is silver, and so silver can be allowed within a certain range. Of course, silver is even if it is present, it will be present in a very small amount, but this small amount will not, it has been observed that this will not affect your conductivity as the other impurities affect. So the first category of copper and its alloy we refer to them as coppers, and it is something that is close to pure copper. Now the other category of copper and its alloy is referred to as high copper alloy. So these high copper alloys, they are characterized by the percentage or the weightage of copper. When you have a material wherein the copper percentage is 96% or more, we categorize them as high copper alloys. The alloying elements that we use in this high copper alloys includes cadmium, beryllium and chromium. So these alloying elements these are relatively the major alloying elements that would be the part of the high copper alloys. Now the reason why one want to use these alloying elements is to increase the strength of the material. So when you compare this high copper alloys with the coppers, even though the conductivity is relatively a little compromised, they have good strength, and for applications where the strength matters, people would prefer high copper alloys than the coppers. Now the other category of copper and its alloys, so the copper alloys, are brass. So brass is something that we are familiar with, and as we dig into or we look closer into the era of copper or this Chalcolithic era, we would have an era where it is referred to as brass era, like when you talk about a whole range of epoch which is categorized as the copper age, a section of it will pertain to brass. Now what characterizes brass is the primary alloying element. When you have a copper as the base metal and the primary alloying element is zinc, this combination is referred to as brass. And the brass, since the only definition or only characterization is the presence of zinc, that is the presence of zinc, when you have other alloying elements like lead into it or tin into it, then we have different categories of brass like leaded brass and tin brass. Now these alloys have a definite properties to them. In addition to their conductivity, these are hugely ductile, and you can machine them in any forms that you want, and they are fairly corrosion resistant. And because of this machinability and corrosion resistance, they pave their way for a good amount of application. You can make them into shapes that are complex for other materials, and because they have this low friction, or when you make movable parts out of it, the friction is fairly low. Then this is the reason why people choose brass for making gears or other moving particles and moving components of a machine. Now the other category of the copper alloys is the bronze. Now this bronze has a negative definition to it. Now what I mean by that is, when you don't have an alloy, when you have an alloy that is not made up of zinc and nickel, but with the base element as copper, then we refer to that as bronze. So the definition of bronze and the way how we would categorize it is, you have an alloy that is with a base metal copper, but the alloying elements are not zinc or nickel. So such alloy with base metal copper and alloying elements other than zinc or nickel, we refer to them as bronze. Now, since because of this definition, there are again, like brass, we have several different bronze with us. We have phosphor bronze, aluminium bronze, and silicon bronze. And as their name suggests, in addition to some alloying elements, these will also be a major alloying elements. So in the phosphor bronze, one of the major alloying elements will be phosphor, and in the aluminum bronze and silicon bronze, the major alloying element would be aluminium and silicon respectively. Now, depending on the alloying elements, we can understand that the properties of the bronze would vary, and depending on the applications that you want these materials to have, you can change the properties by changing the alloying elements. And the categorization is fairly it is categorized in such a way that a large amount of combination of alloying elements would fall into the bronze category. So we have we have a spectrum of materials that copper alloys that fall into this bronze category. Now, similar to brass, these bronze are corrosion resistance. They have a good strength, and also they do not have they don't compromise on conductivity. So depending on the application you need, you can design or you can use certain alloying elements in certain proportions and to arrive at the right set of properties that you desire. So the copper alloys, we have categorized them into coppers, which is pure copper, and we have a definite percentage of 99.3, and we have high copper alloys, wherein we can use some alloying elements that will we use it to increase the strength when you compare that with pure copper. Then we have brass, which is the combination of copper and zinc. Then we have a category of copper alloys called bronze, the definition of which is rather negative. That is, any alloy of copper that does not have zinc and nickel as its major alloying elements, we refer to that as bronze. And like I said, the properties is not definite because the properties of bronze vary with its alloying elements, and there are several alloying elements that you could add to or that comprise bronze, and these alloying elements give us the desired properties. And the final category of copper on this alloy, or the final category of the copper alloys, is the thing that was left out in the bronze, that is an alloy wherein you have a decent amount of nickel and zinc. And this is referred to as, or this is largely used for decorative and ornamental purposes, because this gives you a luster that is similar to that of silver. So what we have is a cheap form of silver, and this is referred to as nickel silvers because it has the luster that is similar to that of silver, and this is made, or the combination of material that gives us this nickel silver is copper, nickel and zinc. So this is nothing but the negative of bronze. So these are the categories of copper alloys that we presently have. We have coppers, high copper alloys, brass, bronze and nickel silvers. So we have seen that the properties vary with the alloying elements that are put into it, and each of these categories have, or the materials that belong, or alloys that belong to each of these categories have definite purpose. Now let us look into, when you see a set of codes given to an alloy, let us understand how, or let us see how we can relate these codes to these categories of alloying elements or categories of copper alloys that we saw in the previous slides. So there are codes that are given to a to an alloy through this unified numbering system, and let us try to relate these codes to the different categories of alloys that we saw in the previous slides. So when you see a code with a prefix or starting with C and followed by number 1. So when you have a codes of this form starting with C and followed by several digits that begin with 1. So these codes, they refer to or they denote coppers, or the pure form of copper, or the coppers and the percentage of copper that characterizes it. The C followed by 1 and the several other numbers, they refer to the category of alloys that we call coppers. Now the high copper alloys, they are designated by C17, C18 and C19. So when you have a designation, when you have a number that refers that begins with these C17, C18 and C19, so they refer to high copper alloys. So all the numbers that begin with C1 that are not followed by 7, 8 and 9, they belong to coppers, and if you have 7, 8 and 9 in them, they belong to high copper alloys. Now the brass, they begin or their number system begins with C2, C3 and C4. Like C1 C1 belongs to high copper alloys and coppers. When you see a numbering system, or when you see a designation that starts with C2, C3 and C4, so these pertain to brass, and these X's that follow these designation, that is the 4 X's that follows each of our the short terminology that we talk about. The X's that follows say C10, the X's that follow C20, they might vary, but when they begin with C1, they can either be coppers or high coppers. When they begin with C2, C3 and C4, they belong to brass. And in case of bronze, the C5 and C6 designate it. So when you see in the unified numbering system, when you see an alloy designated as C5 and C6, and the designation of the number beginning with C5 and C6, it means that it belongs to bronze. And finally, the nickel silver is designated, or the C7 refers to the nickel silver, which is nothing but the alloy of copper, nickel and zinc. And so this is how we can understand from the designation, from the UNS designation, we can understand just by looking at it, we can understand which category of copper alloy it is. So when you have C1, it can either be copper or high copper alloys, and when you have C17, C18 and the C19, when your C1 is followed by 7, 8 and 9, it means that it's a high copper alloy. And when your number designation, it begins with C2, C3 and C4, it is brass. C5 and C6 refer to bronze, and C7 refers to nickel silver. It is important to note that these all belong to the wrought alloy categories. They all are formed by the wrought process, and they belong to this category. And when you talk about as cast alloys of the copper are designated as C8 and C9. So when you are designating the copper alloys, they differentiate it as wrought alloys and cast alloys. The wrought alloys, they have a specific designation for each of these categories, but cast alloy, there are only 2 ways you refer to them, that is C8 and C9. So when you see alloy that is a copper alloy that is designated with C8 and C9, you can be fairly sure that it is a cast alloy, and any other designation, it is a wrought alloy. And depending on what designation it is, you will be able to identify what category of an alloy it is. So this is an easy way, or rather you can make a knowledgeable guess or an educated guess on what a copper alloy could be, or what category of copper alloy it is, by just looking at the UNS designation. Now let us get into the metallographic aspect of things. Now when you want to look into the microstructure of these copper alloys, and once you have polished it to an extent that now you are fairly convinced that now we can just by etching this polished surface, you will be able to see the microstructure. So once you are polished to that extent, the etching is done irrespective of the composition. The etching for the copper and its alloy is done by either immersion or by swabbing. So this is the etching technique that is being followed. Now let us see what are the etchants that can be used. I will not be going into the specific units or how much amount of the etchants we need. That will be relevant when you are doing your practical works, and that you will get to know when you are doing and when you are working on it. But this being a theoretical discussion, I will just give you what are the etchants that we use for a category of copper alloys. So the etching technique is, as we have seen, it's by immersion or swabbing. Now the etchants for the coppers, which is nothing but pure, relatively pure copper metal. For that, we will be using the combination of nitric acid and water. So the coppers they contain more than 99% of copper. So for the 99.3, I guess, to be specific, for that, in order to get the microscopic features of that material visible, we use a combination of nitric acid and water. Now, when we want to visualize brass. Now the same goes for high copper alloys as well. The combination of nitric acid and water works for high copper alloys as well. So coppers and high copper alloys, they have same etchant. The microstructure of this material can be made visual, or you can bring about the contrasting features in the microstructure of coppers and high copper alloys just by the combination of nitric acid and water. Now for the case of brass, we need a combination of acetic acid, water, chromium trioxide and ferric chloride. So the combination of these material would give you or would act as the etchant for brass. Now the change in the etchant is because now we have different chemical composition for these alloys, and therefore and correspondingly the etchant composition changes, and brass, the proportion for these components of the etchants, they change depending on the type of brass we are handling. But generally when you talk about etchants for brass, these are the components that comprise them, and the their proportion might vary with the specific composition of the brass, but usually it involves acetic acid, water, chromium trioxide and ferric chloride. Now let's see what is the etchant that we use for bronze. For bronze we use nitric acid, water, chromium trioxide and ammonium chloride. Like I said, depending on the specific composition of the bronze that we are working on, the proportion of this might vary, but generally they comprise of these components, that is nitric acid, water, chromium trioxide and ammonium chloride. So these etchants, depending on their rate of reaction, they enable us to see or give a different contrast to the different components in the microstructure. Now here is an example of a single of a microstructure that pertains to coppers. Now since coppers is largely made up of, or the main ingredient is copper alone, we have a microstructure that comprises of largely one phase. So this is an example of it, and we will just see one example for each of the categories of copper alloys, and maybe with that we will wind this lecture up. So this is an example for coppers, a category of alloys wherein the copper is more than 99%, and since because of this predominant presence of copper, what we have is a single phase system. There is not much different phases, they are just a single phase system, and the contrast comes from the grain boundaries, and the grain boundaries separate the different grains that largely comprises of a single phase. Now here is an example for brass, and as you can see, with increase in the number of alloying elements, we have now a system wherein we have more than one phase associated with the microstructure. So the dark color region would be one phase and the light color region would be another phase, and again depending on the processing technique, the processing route that we have followed, and depending on the exact composition of this alloy, the phases that constitute this microstructure might vary. But just for the sake of this discussion, since we are just looking, or at least I am giving you an overview of the microstructure that you could expect from copper, I'm just relating the microstructures to the different categories of copper alloys that we have seen. So in case of coppers, it's just a single phase system. You have a multi-polycrystalline microstructure largely made up of a single phase, and in case of brass, since we have increased or we have defined it through its alloying elements, we have certain definite additional phases that are present in the microstructure, so it is no longer a single phase system. Now in case of bronze, it is also similarly, it is no longer a single phase system. We have new phases that are forming into that constitute its microstructure. So ultimately what it means is what it means is that even though this microstructure is dependent on the processing route that we take and the specific composition of the material, when you have when you move away from the pure copper, when you have specific alloying elements added to this copper and made into a different category of copper alloys, the microstructure correspondingly changes, and you move away from a single phase polycrystalline system to a multi-phase polycrystalline system, and that is what we see here. Of course, one can look into the different phase diagram to know what these phases are, and to relate these phases, and to go back to revert back to the processing technique, or to get a knowledge of the processing technique that these microstructure would have experienced based on knowing the composition and the phase diagram. Now I would like to wind this lecture up by showing you certain microstructure that you fairly relate with the ferrous alloys. So in copper alloys, particularly in bronze, it is possible through certain processing technique you would be able to see Wittmann-Stratton structure. So when we talked in the previous lecture, we saw that the Wittmann-Stratton structures, we observed that for the first time in a meteorite, and the meteorite that largely comprised of iron. In addition to iron and its alloys, particularly in steels, we would be able to see such Wittmann-Stratton structure in bronze as well. In addition to Wittmann-Stratton structure, martensite-like sheaves have also been observed in bronze. So when you have a bronze and we process it in the right way, we will be able to see structures like Wittmann-Stratton and martensite. So these are the structures. I mean, at least the one takeaway point is that these structures are not confined to ferrous alloys alone. They can also be found in bronze as well. So with this, I would like to wind this lecture up. I hope you found at least certain part of this lecture interesting. And the reason I did not give much of an importance to, or I did not present an elaborate discussion on etchants and microstructure is because, like I said, they vary with the specific composition of the material and the processing technique you take. Now, this is something that you will be focusing on when you do your project or when you do your assignment for this course, and I will leave that then to you. So maybe in the subsequent lectures in the days to come, you will be or what is expected of you in this course will be briefed to you. So with this discussion on the formation of these structures that you relate to ferrous material, I would like to wind up. So thanks for your attention, and let's see ourselves in the next practical class. Goodbye.